Hi there friends, welcome back to another episode of Generation Tech. My name is Alan. Today we continue our series that looks at the various roles of vehicles in Star Wars by looking at the Separatist Alliance Navy and their larger ships, ranging from frigates all the way to battleships. Two things stand out about Confederacy ships. One is that many of these ships first entered service as merchant vessels. Due to the lawlessness in the Outer Rim, the Republic allowed many trade and corporate interests to create security forces and refit their merchant ships with shields and weapons emplacements to protect them from piracy. So most of the CIS's original naval ships are actually not designed for combat. Second, because of the CIS's more business-like mindset and also lower population in the Outer Rim, most Separatist ships were heavily automated and crewed by droids. This meant that Separatist ships usually looked more skeletal in nature because they didn't require as many internal hallways and structures for organics to walk around in. As a matter of fact, most Separatist ships only had a few pockets of life support for the organic crew members on board. The Munificent-class star frigate was one of the most commonly deployed ships by the Confederate Navy. The Munificent, as you might be able to tell by its nomenclature, was originally designed by the banking clans by Horst Kessel Drive Incorporated and Gwari Revolutionary Industries. The banking clans used these ships as security and also as enforcers and debt collectors. The Outer Rim was full of struggling worlds and new colonies that were looking for capital investment and large loans. One of the ways that organizations like the banking clan would be able to enforce financial agreements with planets is by blockading areas or even violently seizing assets in return for missed payments. This tactic is called debt trap diplomacy, and it's actually commonly practiced on our own planet. Most recently by China's One Belt One Road initiative, where the Communist Party of China has used aggressive high-interest loans to seize land, ports, and utility companies from Africa all the way to the Pacific. A single Munificent-class star frigate and around 825 meters is armed with dozens of turbo lasers and was large enough to pressure smaller planets in the Outer Rim like Toydaria or Sri Lanka to acquiesce to their demands. The Munificent star frigate was also built with a Class 1 hyperdrive, which was considered quite fast for the time period. This allowed it to travel from system to system, collecting debts in a very expedient manner. The Munificent-class star frigate could also hold a surprising amount of cargo, including 150,000 battle droids, which unlike clones could be folded up and stored in depressurized areas of the ship. The Munificent also carried on board a few wings of starfighters. But for the most part, these ships were not classified as carriers and relied on turbo lasers for most of their offensive and defensive measures. The lack of fighters made it very hard for a Munificent-class star frigate to go up against a Venator-class star destroyer and its hundreds of fighters, which is usually why it took 3 to 5 of these frigates to take on one Venator-class. And even though at close range a Munificent-class star frigate was well armed, it lacked the structural integrity and shields that Republic capital ships usually had. One step up from the Munificent, we had the Recusant light destroyer. Based on Mon Calamari blueprints that were stolen by Corran separatists, these light destroyers were mass-produced by the Techno Union using raw materials from the Commerce Guild worlds. These ships ranged in size from 1,000 meters to 2,500 meters in length and were usually deployed in large numbers. Despite their larger size like the Munificent class, the Recusant class was quite skeletal in nature and had lower displacement tonnage than Republic ships that were of similar length. This usually meant a weaker internal structure and less armor. Like the Munificent class, the Recusant class relied on offensive firepower, including one extremely large prow-fitted heavy turbo laser. These ships also usually could carry around 40,000 battle droids and also one large lander, which could take most of these battle droids down to the surface of a planet. Featuring a Class 2 hyperdrive, it wasn't as fast as the Munificent class, and prior to the Clone Wars, the Recusant was generally used in defense fleets for Commerce Guild worlds. Most of the systems on board the ship were controlled by a simple droid brain, which oftentimes was very predictable and also a little bit too aggressive. It would also take around 3 to 5 of these light destroyers to take out one Venator-class star destroyer. The Bulwark-class battlecruiser is one of the lesser-known ships deployed by the CIS. It was mainly manufactured by the Techno Union. The Bulwark-class was around 1,000 meters long and armed with your normal assortment of turbo lasers and ion cannons, but what really made the ship cool was the fact that the entire front section of the ship was encased in heavy reinforced armor, and the ship was used as a battering ram. I'm sure Admiral Holdo would really like this ship. The Providence-class dreadnought was oftentimes found at the head of larger Separatist fleets. This was the preferred command ship for leaders like Count Dooku, Admiral Trench, and General Grievous. These ships ranged in size from 1,000 to 2,000 meters. They were extremely heavily armed with dozens of turbo laser batteries along with missiles and torpedo launchers. While the Republic mainly relied on line-of-sight energy weapons, the Separatists actually had very advanced missile systems that were not only very deadly, but also had extremely long range, along with good accuracy. This helped make up for the CIS Navy's weaker starfighters. Although it should be noted that the Providence class held up to 20 wings of starfighters. The design of the Providence class is quite different from the other more skeletal-looking ships in the CIS Navy, and that's because the ship was designed with heavy Corn and Mon Calamari influences, which is why it looks similar to the later Mon Calamari cruisers. But all that empty space within the ship was actually reserved to carry a whopping 1.5 million battle droids. One Providence class had enough battle material to take over an entire planet. The crew on the ship, however, was relatively small, around 600 droids and at least one sentient organic commander. The Lucrehulk-class cargo freighter was originally used by the Trade Federation to haul massive amounts of freight. This was stored in the large cargo ring that surrounded the central control sphere. After the Republic approved the arming of Trade Federation vessels in the Outer Rim, around 30% of the Trade Federation fleet was modified into battleships. With a diameter of 3,000 meters, these ships usually were the largest vessels on the battlefield and armed to the teeth with bolt-on weapons emplacements. Prior to the Clone Wars, the Lucrehulk was also converted into a droid control ship, which could direct millions of battle droids into combat. This, of course, made the Lucrehulk droid control ships a huge target for enemy fighters. But the ship was well armed. It had around 40 quad turbolaser batteries, 185 point defense quad lasers, around 520 assault laser cannons, along with an additional 51 turbolasers. The Lucrehulk was more like a battle station that served as a weapons platform rather than just a battleship. Within the massive hull, one Lucrehulk could carry around 140,000 battle droids, along with 1,500 vulture droids, 6,000 tanks, 550 battle droid transports, and 50 landers. This was a battleship designed for one purpose: blockading a planet and then crushing the local defense with unrelenting waves of battle droids. Should things go terribly wrong, though, the central command module could separate and fly under its own power. The Subjugator-class heavy cruiser would be classified by the Imperial Naval Doctrine Handbook as a Star Dreadnought. These were by far the most massive ships in the CIS Navy. At almost 5,000 meters long, only 5 known vessels were created in this class. Although they looked quite similar to the Providence-class dreadnought and also, strangely enough, a Mass Effect relay, these ships were far more powerful. Featuring a hypermatter annihilation reactor, the Subjugator class had 2 enormous ion pulse cannons that were hundreds of meters in diameter and could disable multiple Republic capital ships in one shot. With over 500 turbolasers on board, this massive death machine could then make quick work of all those disabled ships. General Grievous's malevolence was able to disable and destroy entire fleets before they were even able to report back to the Republic, causing much fear and panic across the Republic worlds. Eventually, a massive Republic fleet chased the Malevolence down and destroyed it in a battle that many Star Wars historians compare to the sinking of the Bismarck. The Republic were ultimately able to disable the ion cannons on board with Y-wing bombers. One of the major weaknesses of the Subjugator class was that it lacked an adequate amount of point defense weapons and had only around 144 starfighters on board, far less than the smaller Lucrehulk-class and Providence class. The Malevolence was also deployed without an escort fleet, making it far more vulnerable. But even with its main weapon and hyperdrive disabled, it was extremely hard to take down a Subjugator-class ship simply because of its size and the massive amount of armor it had. The Republic finally managed to destroy the Malevolence after a Jedi strike team went on board and rigged the hyperdrive to ram the ship into a moon. Although the Grand Army of the Republic managed to rout the Separatist droid army on the ground during the Battle of Geonosis, it lacked the naval power to properly blockade the system. The largest ships in the Republic fleet at the time was the Acclamator-class assault ship, which was lightly armed and designed for transporting clones. This meant that most of the Confederate Navy ships that made it to orbit were able to escape from the system, and as we all know, most Confederate ships hold a ridiculous amount of battle droids. It's estimated that around 4 million battle droids escaped Geonosis. But without the C-9979 landing craft, most of these droids would be useless. Not every Separatist ship was designed to fly in atmosphere and depended on these landing craft to launch invasions. At 370 meters in width, these vehicles could bring into battle around 114 AAT tanks, 11 multi-troop transports, which each could carry 112 battle droids along with a variety of other vehicles. These landing vessels were relatively slow and also lightly armed. They lacked the hyperdrive and completely depended on larger ships for transportation. Although not officially considered a CIS Navy ship, the YV-865 freighter oftentimes was used to conduct CIS activity. Built by the Carillion Engineering Corporation, these 52-meter-long freighters were mostly used by Zygerians to transport slaves. These ships were lightly armed and required only one pilot and could store around 100 slaves in the cargo area. Last but not least, we have the weird-looking Techno-Union developed hardsell class interstellar transport. I say weird because it kind of looks like the antiquated lunar module from the Apollo missions. This ship, however, was far more capable than it looked, and it was considered kind of a status symbol amongst Techno-Union officials. Built with a titanium hull and heavily shielded, these were incredibly well-protected ships. Instead of using conventional repulsor lifts to lift off the ground, though, the hardsell class actually used rocket propulsion, which was quite rare for the Star Wars galaxy, and considered a bit too unreliable and volatile. At 220 meters in length, the majority of the interior was delegated for storage. During the Clone Wars, this usually meant hundreds of Hailfire tanks and missile ammunition. At the cone of the ship were the more luxurious passenger compartments for the passengers and crew. Most of the cabins could be pressurized, as these ships were usually owned and operated by Skakoans, who needed a methane-rich environment that was rarely available outside of their own homeworld. The hardsell transports also featured a very impressive communication suite, which allowed investors on board access to the interstellar stock trade, in case they want to do some high-frequency trading. The ship was also fitted with the Class 1 hyperdrive along with 6 thrusters for sublight speed. This meant that the hardsell relied on speed and not firepower to escape threats. As a matter of fact, it hardly had any weapons emplacements at all. So as you can see, the CIS Navy, like the Separatist droid army, was built with quantity and low cost in mind, which is probably why it always took several Separatist ships to take out one Republic Navy ship. Anyway, guys, I hope you enjoyed today's episode. Don't forget to subscribe, hit that notification button so you don't miss out on the rest of this series. We'll be looking at Republic capital ships next. Anyway, guys, thanks for joining us today. If you're watching this, you are Generation Tech.